Hello and welcome to Comics Corner with me, your host, Connor Nolan. Over the course of each episode, I'm going to break down a comic book story and discuss its main character's plot, talk a little bit about the fan reception, give it my own personal rating, and also where you can find the comic book. Now, sit back, relax, and get ready to learn about comics. Hello and welcome back, everybody, and today I've got another what if story. This story focuses on the character of Namor the Sub-Mariner, who is a mainstay in the Marvel Comics, but he hasn't been introduced in any live action format just yet. But I have a feeling, seeing how Fantastic Four has been basically confirmed to be in the MCU, like they've said there's going to be a Fantastic Four, they just haven't said who the cast is yet. But Submariner ties in a lot with the Fantastic Four, so I have a feeling he's going to be hitting the big screens pretty soon. So, today, we are covering What If Submariner issue number 1. Now, this is sold as a single issue, but it's still technically part of the What If line. This came out in 2005. It was published by Marvel, in case you didn't get that, from Submariner, Fantastic Four, and What If. This was written by Greg Pak. This took place during the time when What If, his main character was this guy named Hector. I have no idea how to pronounce his last name, so I am not even going to try to pronounce his last name. He is a hacker who was able to hack into other realities' internets. I don't know, it was kind of this weird thing that they're trying in the early 2000s, but it's a really cool idea, and his hacker name was the Watcher. And so that's a little nod to the original What Ifs, where the Watcher would just watch alternate realities. Now, this is a Namor the Sub-Mariner book. So, if you haven't guessed it already, the main character is Namor the Submariner, who is the king of Atlantis in Marvel Comics. He's got aquatic adaptation, supreme strength, speed, agility, senses, and reflexes. He's got mild invulnerability. He can fly because he's got tiny wings on his ankles. I don't know why, but we're just gonna roll with it. He's got telepathic control over sea creatures. He's got longevity. So, in original Marvel continuity, he was introduced in the 40s and worked with Captain America in the 40s. But he stayed around, and he, unlike Captain America, was not frozen in ice. So they're just like, oh, he's got longevity. He can live for a really, really long time. He's also got hydrokinesis, the ability to copy powers of oceanic life forms. That's a new one. Bodily water generation, and marine life empathy. So those are his little powers. In the comics, he's kind of rough and tough, but you know, this story is going to kind of turn that on its head. The other major character that we need to talk about that's in this story is the Human Torch. Now, it's not that Human Torch of the Fantastic Four. It's not that one. It is the Human Torch, Jim Hammond, who was the original Human Torch in the 1940s, who was an android that has the abilities to manipulate fire. He's got resistance to fire. He's got flight, ability to survive without oxygen for long periods of time. He's also an accomplished street fighter and a skilled unarmed combatant. So, he's an android. He fought along Namor and Captain America in the 1940s. He showed up again in the 80s, kind of dived off, came back, dived off, kind of waned with the over the years with the popularity, but he's a big mainstay for old Marvel characters. So, with all that in mind, we're going to go over to the plot now. Alright, everybody, let's get into the plot. But before we get into the plot for real, let's just talk about this cover real quick. It is amazing. This is by far one of my favorite What If covers. For some reason, I get Star Trek vibes, but I feel like that's because Namor is drawn, and it's kind of drawn like Mr. Spock, but not really, but it gives you the Spock vibes because of the ears and the hair. but also it shows off the suit that he uses for the majority of this book, and it's just so clean, and I personally wouldn't mind seeing more of this suit. Okay, now that we're done with that little tangent, let's get into the actual plot. And we start off in the Arctic in 1920, and we see two people standing, and we figure out that they are husband and wife, and they are a human male and an Atlantean female, and they're talking about how they're so happy because because she's pregnant, and she's like, oh, we just have to make sure that my father can't find us because he'll want the heir. Um, and then they are set upon by Atlantean troops, and the human guy, who we later find out is Captain Mackenzie, um, kills all of them. Bang, bang, bang with his revolver. And, but, we see that the wife, has been hit with lasers, so she doesn't have a lot of time left. And they're talking about what they're going to do. Then we cut to the Watcher, who, like I said earlier, is Hector, who found an anomaly on the computer and can see through realities and see their other internets and blah blah blah. And he says in this one, Captain Mackenzie lived when originally he died, and Princess Fen was supposed to be dragged down to Atlantis with her father, and that her son, who's Namor, should have been raised in Atlantis and not in a subdivision of cheap houses for military support staff in Honolulu. Now, this is very important that we keep this Honolulu fact in mind. And then we see them after their son is born, and she says, "His name, call him Namor, but keep him from the sea." And the dad's like, "What does Namor mean?" And she's like, "Goodbye." Dies immediately. Bang! Right after giving birth to her son, right after naming him, boom, dead. Okay. I don't know about you. That moved a little bit fast, but I mean, it totally makes sense. And Hector's like, "Oh, this is different. Now it's time to watch." Sorry, but that line sounds a little creepy, not gonna lie. And then we get the title page with "What if Prince Namor of Atlantis grew up on land?" We get all the little notes about the writers, the pencilers, the inkers, yada yada. And we see a young teen Namor standing next to the water with his friends, and they're like, "Oh, come on, get in here." He's like, "Oh, I can't swim." And they're like, "Oh, you've got to be a wimp." And they throw some water on him, and he walks away. And he walks to a bathroom, and he's got a knife, and he's gonna cut off the wings off of his ankles. And his dad busts in and is like, "What are you doing? You shouldn't be doing that. You got nothing to be ashamed of." And he's like, Namor's like, "Well, if I have nothing to be ashamed of, why are you making me hide the wings on my feet?" And he's like, "Listen, you know the story, you know what happened, you know how they killed your mother." And he's like, "I hate the people that killed my mother." And he's like, "Don't say that because they're here." And we see the King of Atlantis and two of the Royal Guard, and he's like, "Oh, I've come to take you home." And he's like, I'm not going anywhere." And they're trying to convince him to calm down, and he just goes crazy with this knife and tries to stab the king. Then we hear boom, boom, boom. And it turns out that this is all happening on December 7th, 1941, during the Pearl Harbor attack. And Namor goes to try and runs after his dad, who's going to save the kids. There's an explosion. Namor's dad gets hit. Namor's in the sea. And then I don't know what it is he throws, but he throws something and just annihilates this bomber plane. And then starts flying. And Namor says to his grandfather, "Keep the kids safe." And Namor's grandfather's like, "No, you're coming with me." And Namor's just flying around, saving people, and he's like, "Atlantis can go burn in hell, because I'm not going there. I'm gonna help everybody I can, no matter what." And his grandfather says before leaving, well, she just might. And I'm like, what? I'm sorry, you want some dude that had never even been to Atlantis, much less swim, like, who even knows how to swim, to rule your underwater people, whereas you have been ruling them for 20 years and you haven't had any issues. But Namor is saving kids, and then this military guy comes up and he's like, I hope you're American, ho ho ho. And then we cut to 2 years later where Namor and the Human Torch, and like I said, it's not that Human Torch, it's Jim Hammond, are flying about. They're taking care of business. You know, they are the super soldiers. And then we get this nice scene, and later down the line, it's going to become the most heartbreaking scene of this entire comic when you think about it and when it's referenced later. But we see Human Torch and Namor like signing autographs and all this stuff, and Human Torch is like, "Oh, it's funny that after we sign their autographs, they disappear, and I wish I was normal, but I'll never be normal because I'm just a sentient android, and they think I'm a freak." And they're talking about how Namor has a place that he could go home. Namor's got family, and then Namor says, "You're my family, Torch," and is beautiful. And then the ship explodes, and we see all this crazy stuff happening. So Human Torch flies up to go and get the stuff. Namor is taking care of the injured, and then we see rockets, and Namor screams out for Torch, and then all we see is the Torch say Namor, and then explodes and crashes into the ocean. And then we see Namor trying to recover the body, and this aquatic suit with a Nazi swastika on it. Then we jump to 30 years later because, you know, why wouldn't we? And we see this memorial for the Human Torch and these people protesting because, you know, why would we want to have a memorial for a valiant hero who died in the line of duty saving a bunch of people? You know, why would we want to do that? Because he's a robot that could turn on fire. And we see Namor in civilian clothes talking to who's assumedly his handler, and it turns out that Namor has been working for the U.S. government ever since, and he's been taking care of assassin, stealth type jobs. And they're like, Namor's like, oh, I already have my orders, so I'm not gonna, you know, I already know what I'm doing. Why am I here? It's like, well, your orders have changed. And we take Namor to this place, and he's swimming under the sea, and then it is Atlantis, and we see that all of the Atlanteans are in chains, and they are being abused by these guys that are in Nazi uniforms. Well, they're not so much Nazi uniforms, but they're like uniforms with Nazi symbols on them and robots and stuff, and it's an evil Namor. And Namor fights evil Namor, and he's like, who are you? And evil Namor is like, we're your children. And we see there's a couple different evil Namors, and they're talking about how, the Nazis saw you, and then we're like, oh, we're gonna steal his DNA, and then we will craft clones of him because he's the perfect specimen, and yada yada. And the guys that are in the submarine that are Namor's handlers are talking about it, and we see this explosion, and then the Atlanteans, finally having their one true king, come back, start fighting and rising up against their oppressors that are the Nazis. And we see Namor break into this thing, and it is some sort of generator. And it is the Human Torch's body, and he's just on fire saying Namor on repeat. And we have some evil scientist that's like, oh, ha ha ha, I'm gonna melt the ice caps, everybody's gonna drown. Namor takes care of the scientist and starts pulling apart the machine that the Human Torch is stuck in. And the entire time his handlers are screaming at him, Mackenzie, what are you doing? You've got new orders. He's dead. He's got no brain patterns. There's nothing. He's just dead. And Namor's like, but I can help the Atlanteans. They're fighting against their oppressors. I can fix all of this. And they say this line, "Those aren't your people, Mackenzie." And he's like, "My name is Namor," and I'm sorry, but that's cool. But we see the Human Torch in the background just saying Namor and repeat, and he's just thinking about how the Human Torch, last time we saw him, was talking about family and how Namor's family was the Human Torch. And then this is the most heartbreaking scene. He throws the Human Torch, he looks on, and then it just explodes. And Namor goes back to Atlantis, and then we see them welcome Namor back as their king. And then there's an explosion, and I'm not really sure what it's supposed to be, but I think it's supposed to be Atlantis. And then we see a little shot in the White House, and then we get this epic monologue, and they made a statue for Namor next to the Human Torches, and they're talking about all these things and how the world was saved because of Namor. And we get a brief glimpse of people like trying to look at the thing, but the mom's like, "Oh no, that's bad." And they're talking about all of this stuff that happened, and then we get this little monologue from who I'm assuming is the president, and he's like, "Why did nobody ever tell me that Namor means avenging son?" And we see that Namor is the only survivor of that explosion, and then that is the end. But yeah, overall the plot is really good. We get a couple, when we keep going down into the comic, we see a couple of the other what if stories that are happening at this time that like their covers. Like we see one for Captain America, we see one for the Fantastic Four, we see one for Wolverine, we see the one that's about Namor, we see one which I believe is Daredevil, and then we see one with Galactus on it. So yeah, overall it's a really good story. And now we're gonna move on to the part of the show where I talk about fan reception, where you can purchase this wonderful comic, and my own personal rating for this comic. Okay, so I'll talk to you guys in a minute. Alright everybody, this is the part of the show where we talk about fan reception, where you can buy it, and then my own personal rating. So, starting with the fan reception. This is a book from 2005. This is also a single issue, so it's really hard to find with single issue stories just without extreme extraneous research and literally being there in 2005 when it came out to tell what people thought about it. But about 22,000 copies were sold, so I'm pretty sure people didn't not like it. So it was received pretty well, especially seeing how it's a single issue. Now, where you can buy it, this is extremely hard to find. I don't think it's in any collected trades, but you can find it on Amazon, eBay, and other online sellers if you look hard enough. Now, for my own personal rating, after much consideration, I'm going to give it a 7. Now, the reason I'm giving it a 7, I'm not the biggest Namor fan, but this is a really interesting book. I also feel like it was rushed at points, but you know, it's a what if, so they only had a certain amount of page numbers to get their whole story in. But, you know, I feel like it could have been slowed down just a little bit. But overall, I liked it. And I also liked that they showed the original Human Torch. So, 7 overall. Yeah. Alright, guys. Until the next time. Thanks so much for listening to Comics Corner with me, Connor Nolan. If you like what you heard today, why don't you tell your friends about it and share it all around? And if you have any suggestions for what comics should be next on the show, leave a comment down below. And remember, comics are king.